Hello dear viewer! I came up with a new, very simple setup for your next Fulgora starter base. It uses logistic bots to move items. Let me show you how it works. It is made out of three components. First, the recycling area. On the right side, there's a row of recyclers dedicated to scrap recycling, outputting into red passive provider chests. To move the scrap into these recyclers, I do recommend using a belt, even though the rest of the base will be bot-based. Adjacent to this row is another row of recyclers, again outputting into passive provider chests. But these recyclers will get their items from the network via logistic bots and requester chests. They are basically responsible for recycling the resulting products from the scrap recycling to get, for example, green circuits, plastic or iron. The reason these two rows, or rather the red chests from the scrap recyclers and the requester chests, should be adjacent to each other should be obvious, to reduce the distance bots have to travel to transfer items over. But how do we make sure that the chests are not overflowing? How do items get into the requester chests without accidentally recycling things we want to keep? That's what this scrap control component is for. A decider combinator controls what needs to be recycled. To make the decision, it reads the entire contents of the logistic network from a roboport using a red wire. Additionally, there's a constant combinator which dictates which items should potentially be recycled using a green wire. The decider combinator will look at these signals and determine for each signal if it is first present in the green network, meaning it's one of those items we potentially want to recycle, and at the same time it will look at the current total amount of that item in the red network. If there are more than 400 items already, the condition will be true and the signal will be outputted using a fixed value of 32. These new signals will be sent to the second generation recyclers, or rather their requester chests, with a new wire. This way we collect 400 of each item before we start recycling it. The fixed value of 32 in the combinator simply defines how many items should be requested at once by the requester chests. Why not just recycle when any item has more than 400 in stock? Well, because then we would also start recycling items we want to keep. For example, the Fulgora science pack, holmium plates or any other valuable item that has nothing to do with recycling at all. In the beginning I said there were three components. What's still missing? Two items in particular slow down recycling significantly because their recycling time is so high. Steel and concrete, which represent 10% of scrap recycling outcomes. There's a better and much faster way to get rid of these items. First, turning steel into steel chests with a ratio of 8:1, and then recycling the chests at high speed. Second, turning concrete into hazard concrete. Hazard concrete has a recycling time of 0.01 seconds versus 0.62 seconds for normal concrete. That's over 60 times faster. The inserters are set to grab these items when there's more than 200 steel or concrete in the logistic network, so they will never be recycled by the regular recycling block. Before I show you how to scale this up into the mid and late game, let me show you how a typical starter base will look like using this system. In the center, the three core components, scrap recycling and intermediate recycling, scrap control and the advanced method to void steel and concrete. On the left side of the island, production of holmium solution, holmium plate production, and over here I make electrolyte. Liquids will of course be transported with pipes. Everything else uses bots. Requester chests for input and passive provider chests for output. To the right of the recycling block, superconductors and supercapacitors. Because we are using bots, there's so much clarity and space in between the subfactories. You will achieve a very neat and tidy looking base. This is the production of accumulators for the electromagnetic science pack. Oh, I forgot. To make superconductors, we also need light oil. The subfactory is down here. It's also producing rocket fuel for the rocket silo. Everything else you see in the north of the island is basically a mall making useful items to construct and expand the base, including the production of level 2 modules. Down south, a whole lot of accumulators to store lightning power, and I built an elevated train track to move scrap from this island over to the base. Usually, these very small and round islands on Fulgora contain the most dense scrap depots on the planet. Mine still has 19 million scrap left. It will last for a long time. We are consuming a full red belt of scrap, which is totally fine for a starter base. But what if we want to increase production to transition into the mid and late game? Let's first test if the blueprints can handle a full turbo belt of scrap. Of course, I will utilize normal modules to speed things up, and a couple of beacons. We do not reach 3.6k scrap recycled per minute, because the scrap inserters are actually a bottleneck now. Let's add more. Perfect, we recycle a full turbo belt. But upon closer inspection of the scrap control decider combinator, I see that the number of gears is increasing, which means the intermediate scrap recycling isn't fast enough. Let's add a couple more recyclers. Here we go, it's running smoothly now. All items stay at the maximum quantity of 400. Can the system also handle a stacked full turbo belt? Yes, it can, when upgrading to rare items, adding a couple recyclers, more bots, and changing the thresholds a bit. 14.4k scrap recycled per minute. Actually an impressive result given the small size of the setup, and with legendary items it could be even smaller again. With this amount of scrap recycling, you can produce quite a lot of science packs. But can we just quadruple production by copy-pasting the system 3 more times? Assuming we find a large enough island or use foundations, of course. The scrap control signals can be connected using the substations. At first glance we see the maximum possible scrap recycling rate, but it's immediately clear that there's something terribly wrong with the bot network. Scrap control tells us that items are accumulating quickly, especially gears, green circuits and solid fuel. The chests are simply too far apart and bots aren't smart enough to target the closest chests. Adding a huge amount of legendary bots and legendary roboports is an improvement, but I think it's now obvious that this cannot work properly and efficiently. I also tried to copy the steel and concrete recycling a couple times, but to no avail. The only way to make this work would be to have 4 separate logistic networks, which then transfer items over to a new network dedicated to the production of Fulgora items. Or scrap this system and build a new one, tailor-made for heavy late game throughput. Okay, thanks for watching, take a look at my other videos, like and subscribe, bye.